Hi and welcome to the landscape module of PhotoIQ. I'm your instructor Gus Cantivero, and in this first unit we're going to talk about the history and the fundamentals of a great landscape. Let's go. So if you're taking the full curriculum, you have noticed in the beginning of the Still Life and Food module that I explained the reason why I put that module in the curriculum, because it gives you the time to set the camera down, observe your subject, think about what you want to do, compose your image, and then establish your goals for the image and perhaps your sequence of images. Now, the reason why I put landscape as the second module is because we're building off of that fundamental, that principle of setting the camera down and thinking about what you want to do. Now, there's going to be some things that are also going to be time sensitive in landscape photography. Just like when you're working with food photography, you could have melting ice cream or ice that's melting or hot food that's getting cold. Now, in landscape, you could also have a sunrise and a sunset where you need the image to be taken just at the right time, and you might only have about a 10-minute window. But 10 minutes is still a lot longer than, say, photographing hockey. The action is going to be moving so fast that you're going to have to be adjusting at the speed of the action. When you are doing landscape photography, one of the biggest aspects of it is the pre-planning, the knowing what you want out of it. Of course, there's going to be stuff that's spur of the moment when you're hiking or going on a scenic drive and you're going to want to pull over and see something that is really picturesque, and you're going to want to then take your time and take that photo. Try not to rush it. Give it the due diligence, because some of the images that you're going to come across and that you might create among your art career may stay with you for a really long time. The last thing that you want to happen is to wish that you notice something out of place in the frame. Maybe there might be a road sign or something like that, or a person in the distance or perhaps in the foreground that you didn't notice. And it kind of stinks when you get that stuff in there, because it really kills the vibe and the mood of the image. So if you have an extra 30 seconds to just observe your image, take an exposure, play it back on your screen, zoom in a little bit, and then scroll through that image. So, zoom into 50%, and then if you have a joystick or a touchscreen, whatever it is, slide around that image and really look at it, critique it, think about the result that you got and how it might be better. One of the things that I like to talk about is allow yourself to be bothered by the content of the image. If you don't get a reaction, then you haven't necessarily created something that's of any value. I'm not trying to put it down. I'm just trying to say that images that create reactions are the ones that have the most value. Those are the ones that people are going to be the most inspired by. So the word inspire, inspiration, is definitely something that we're going to use as a jumping off point, because why is it valuable? What makes landscape photography special? Well, it has the power to inspire. And what I mean by that is that it has the power to inspire people to want to travel, to go to that place and see that view or something similar to it. Whenever you see a great a landscape photo, a good travel photo, whatever your scene of choice is, if it's a beach or a tropical rainforest or a rocky mountain like it is for me, although I like the beaches too, I like the rainforest, I like everything. If you are someone who really, like me, really likes the mountains, then when you see an image that's taken from a high perspective and you have that summit in the distance that's poking between the clouds and the sunbeams coming down and that sort of stuff, that inspires me to want to get out there. I live in Colorado, so there's mountains all over the place, and I'd never get tired of looking at them. Another aspect that's really special with landscape photography is that not only does it have the power to inspire, which is the inspiration to conquer or accomplish or climb or learn a new skill or something. If it's something that requires you to get in shape to get up that mountain, then that is an inspiration to you to maybe conquer an injury like I have. I actually have a back injury that I've had for multiple years, and it's taken me a long road to get to the point where I'm able to lug my camera around, hike many miles, and climb a distance to be able to get that great photograph. And when I was first able to hike multiple miles again, it really made me emotional. I was very proud of the accomplishment that I had achieved. So I was partially inspired by those great landscapes taken at many miles away from the roadside, because the greatest views are not necessarily from the shoulder of a road. The second bullet point I have here is invoke introspection. And what I mean by that is when you look at a landscape image, especially when you've seen them printed really large, like I have some of my landscapes printed large in my house. So inspiration and introspection can be summed up in this image here. This was actually a 9+ mile hike in Hawaii that I took. And as I mentioned, I had that back injury. So being able to conquer this height and this length of a hike that was actually very difficult through mud and rock and river crossings and things and climbs that were near vertical, to get up there and take this photograph of this lone tree all the way at the top of this summit with the sunbeams breaking down through the clouds, and you can see the shoreline of the south of Oahu. This is one of my favorite photos that I've taken. I really like it. When other people look at it, they say, oh, the tree looks like it's magical, or there's it's like the tree of life or something. To me, it's just a place where it's a very meditative spot. And I can think of personally the accomplishment that it took me to get there, and also the peace that I felt at the top of this very difficult climb. So what lessons can we learn from landscape? Maybe as a photographer, you're not particularly interested in landscape. Now, if you bought just the landscape module, you clearly are interested in landscape and want to learn more about it. If you're taking the full curriculum, maybe you're not that excited about it, or you've never really considered why it might be valuable or important. Well, the things that we can learn from landscape is that it's going to make us much better at our ability to compose an image with things that we can't necessarily control. Some of the things we can control by moving left, right, up or down, or getting closer or further away. But we can't take a tree and then move it over here. We can't move a lake. We can't make a mountain move just a little bit to the side so that it looks better, or rotate. The position of the objects in landscape are what they are. The only thing that we can do to change the composition is move ourselves. We have two legs, mountains do not. So if there's something that's wrong with the photograph, if there's something that's bothering you with it, with the way things are lining up, then move yourself left or right, and you can accomplish a great deal with that composition. There's also lens choices to zoom in or get a wider angle to include more of it. Telephoto shots can be used to great success with landscape because you can highlight just two particular objects that are next to each other and let them play off each other rather than being distracted by other things. Perhaps you might even be avoiding things like a road or telephone lines. Those are very common, especially in the American West or Midwest, on the West Coast, where we have beautiful landscapes, but we still have evidence of infrastructure, of industry. And sometimes we don't want to include that because it just kills the mood of the image. It's not introspective if we're looking at this beautiful, pristine landscape and then there's a quarry, tucked into the middle of it. It's not as beautiful. Let's just be frank about that. So it may require you to do a little bit of a climb, or maybe a bit of a drive, or get permission from somebody who has private property to allow you to, climb up a hill or something to get a better angle. Some people might allow that. You never know. It's worth an ask. Other things that we can learn are becoming better experts at our exposure, knowing when we're able to retain the highlights, when we're able to keep our shadow detail. These are the things that play off each other. So when you lose your highlights but you maintain your shadows and your midtones, you now have blown out portions of the image. And as we've talked about in other units, your eye goes to the brightest parts of the image. So when you have things that are blown out, your eye is just going to be attracted to these bright, solid white splotches of color, usually in the sky or in glares or reflections on water. And that's not going to benefit the image in any way. So if you can hold those highlights, you're always going to be better off. Processing is another way that we can get really good through shooting landscapes. Processing meaning your raw process. So when you take your raw images into Lightroom or Capture One or your image processor of choice, depending on how advanced that software is, there's going to be things like gradient filters or radial filters, meaning that if we take this image, for example, you'll be able to draw a gradient meaning that you'll select from here and then drag downward, and then you will have a fade off. And then within that fade, you can set different parameters like boosting or dropping your exposure. So if you wanted to, say, drop the exposure in the sky, but not the rest of the image, you would draw a gradient filter down from the top down to right around the third line, and then you would reduce your exposure by about a stop, and that won't affect anything in the bottom 2/3 of the image. So learning these tricks and getting better at them by practicing, you're going to become a master of your processing tools, and then you can carry that over to all the other genres of photography, like portraiture or still life or whatever you are interested in. Planning and effort both go hand in hand, because if you plan your image, you're still going to have to put the effort into carrying it out. So when you are shooting landscapes, having a little bit of an idea of how far of a walk it is, how long it's going to take to get there, what kind of supplies you might need, be food or water, additional batteries for your camera. Will you be facing into the sun? Will you be facing away from the sun? Will you be near water? What's the weather? Is it going to be snowing or raining? So these are all the things that you're going to have to go into your planning. It's not just choosing your location, it's knowing about your location. Are you going to be going on a trip to, a national park in Alaska or Montana? These are the things that you're going to need to know to be prepared. Thinking about not bringing too heavy of a tripod, things like that. You want to try to put a little forethought into it so that you perhaps know the image that you want to come away with, but also how you can get that image. Hit and miss. Landscape photography can really stink sometimes. It can be a big waste of time because you might find a great view, a great location, and you might wait for 2.5 hours for the sun to come out in order to get that beam of light hitting the part of the area that you want. And sometimes you don't get it. Sometimes the clouds will just clear away entirely. You'll end up with a blue sky and you just have clear light everywhere, and maybe you wanted a moody sky, sort of like what I had here. It's very difficult to know. There's also images that you might want to capture that require inversion, which is when you're able to go onto a hill or a mountaintop and be above the clouds. Inversion only happens in certain weather conditions. And you need to study the weather in your area or the area where you're going to be traveling in order to know what causes inversion and what time of day it might burn off. If you are in Salt Lake City, for example, it can happen well into the afternoon. So hiking up to a peak, which is only a couple of hours from the city, would allow you a long period of time where you'll be able to get the image that you want, and you don't have to start at 3 a.m. to get it. If you're in other areas, like in Southern California or here in Colorado, sometimes it happens, you need to usually start pretty early because it will burn off by 8 a.m. It'll be gone. Just try not to get too disappointed, because with the difficulty comes huge rewards. So nothing that's amazing or really worth working for is going to be easy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth anything. Everybody would have it. The good news is that it's very accomplishable. It is attainable, provided that you put in the work. And just because you didn't get the exact image that you wanted does not mean that you can't come away with a great image. So we're going to try to study how we can maybe take a difficult situation and turn it into a much better result. So what kind of lenses do you have in your kit? You can accomplish great landscapes with just about any type of a lens. You don't have to have a wide angle, and you don't have to have a telephoto, but both can be used. If all you have is a longer lens, then you can certainly use that. If all you have is a wider lens, then you can use that. If you have a zoom lens, then that's going to give you the flexibility to be prepared regardless of the situation. If all you have is, say, 2 prime lenses, a 24mm and a 50mm, then that's fine, we'll work with that. Sometimes you need to shoot a little bit wider than you want to and then crop in your post-processing in order to create the image that you want. You just kind of want to have it in your mind and know, okay, I'm shooting a little wider than I want to because I only have a 24mm prime lens and I can't move closer because I'm at the edge of the water. Okay, fine. Then we're going to have to crop that in post. That's totally acceptable. There's no reason why that can't be okay. On the slide, I have a couple of kit lenses, which are the lenses that come with a lot of the cameras that Canon or Nikon offers, and those are going to be the vast majority of the cameras owned by the people watching these videos. So that's why I'm going to use those. Of course, there's great lenses and cameras by other brands, which I use. I use Fuji and Sony. Do not get obsessed with the type of lens or type of camera that you have, because that is not going to make or break your landscape image. The great thing about it is that even if you have a slow lens, meaning a lens that doesn't open up wider than an f3.5, you just make your shutter longer. You have other ways that you can compensate for the shortcomings of your equipment when it comes to landscape photography, because your camera is not photographing a moving subject. There is going to be times when you want to try to speed up your shutter because you may have wind and it's going to cause a lot of sway. And if you are limited to your f-stop, if you can only open up to an f5.6 because you're zoomed out, that's a shortcoming that you're just gonna have to live with. And that is the reason why people buy faster lenses. Faster meaning they can open up wider, allowing the shutter speed to be faster. Slower lenses meaning they don't open as much, allowing as much light in, and then you have to slow down your shutter speed. So the fast and the slow refers to the shutter speed compensation. One thing I will recommend is getting a tripod or some kind of support. I'm not really a tripod shooter and I never hike with one, but I have really been considering getting a very small compact tripod to hike with that only weighs a couple of pounds, just so that I can have it and have more options when I get to those really great views. A tripod, the benefit of a tripod is more than just allowing you a slow shutter speed. It allows you to really think about your composition. Put the camera down, lock it in place, step back from it, look at the screen, think about what's in frame, and then make those little adjustments here or there. When you're shooting handheld, which is what I do, you tend to shoot more from the hip, not noticing some minor details, and this does happen sometimes for me, and we'll get into the ethics of retouching your landscape images in just a moment. But having a little bit of support is a good thing because it allows you to take nighttime photography, which is something that you just can't do handheld. It's not possible because you're talking about 25-second exposures. As I kind of alluded to, there is no correct focal length. So again, don't get obsessed with the type of lens that you have. Some people are more attracted to very wide-angle photos. Totally fine. Some people are more attracted to medium focal length or telephoto images. Again, that's your style, that's your preference. If you are, then I recommend getting a lens specifically for that. You may want to get something that's a 70 to 200 focal length, or a 100 to 300, or 100 to 250, somewhere around there, because that's going to allow you, when you get up to one peak, to photograph another peak. And that, those photos can be really cool. On the slide here, I have 3 different focal length examples that will explain exactly what I mean. The top image was shot at 18 millimeters, and I was very close to the tree. I could only back up about, 8 or 9 feet from it, 10 feet maybe. And so 18 millimeters allowed me to get from the bottom of the tree with a little bit of dirt in the foreground all the way to the horizon. And if I was any tighter than that, it probably still would have been an okay shot, but I would have lost all of the outside context going on in the image, which is this surrounding panorama of the other canyon walls. And those would have been lost because if I was shooting at even 24, 26 millimeters, it would have been cropped around here to here. So it would have been just the tree without the surroundings. Still would have been fine, still would have been a good photo. It just wouldn't have been quite as dynamic. The 2 bottom images are both kind of around the same composition and relative distance or importance in frame, but the actual distance of them is very different, and the actual size of them is very different. This one is much further away and it's at 85 millimeters. This one is much closer and it's at 50 millimeters. So there's a big difference in the length of the lens being used, but there's also a big difference in the size of the mountain that I'm photographing. Now, a little bit about the history of landscape photography, and I think that this is more than just a history lesson. I think it's actually really interesting, because if you think about where we are with photography and the size of this camera that I have here in my hand, 42 megapixels with 4K video and face detection and in-body image stabilization and all of this really fascinating stuff, and the ability to take thousands of exposures on a single memory card. Well, think about the way it used to be done. This is Ansel Adams, who lived from 1902 to 1984, and he's one of the most famous landscape photographers of all time. In fact, I would say he's the landscape photographer. He's the one that everyone thinks of when you say landscape photography history, or the history of landscape photography. He's obviously most well known for black and white photography because he started working so long ago. He became really well known because he was commissioned by the United States Parks Administration during the 1930s. So he was commissioned to go and shoot iconic images of the parks during the Great Depression. And this was, of course, sort of one of those jobs programs where they were trying to give people things to do, and they were just doling money out left and right in order to make people keep them busy. He mostly worked in the Western United States because that's where the biggest parks are, and since he was commissioned by the Park Service to go and photograph the most iconic places in the parks, that's where he worked. He also did some work elsewhere in the world, but this is what he's most known for. You can see in the portrait of Ansel Adams the old equipment that he worked with. It was not exactly as light and portable as the stuff that we have now. He has a really, really old, very, very heavy design tripod with a view camera, most likely with either 4x5 film or 8x10 film, meaning that each sheet was 8 inches by 10 inches, and that was one negative. So he would hike a great distance, because back then they didn't have off-road vehicles and ATVs and things like that. So he had to carry his equipment, not just his supplies to camp with or his food or whatever it was, but he had to work really, really hard to get these images. And he was a real outdoorsman. He really knew the landscape, and he knew, he was a conservationist, and he really, really loved the Western United States landscape. So he spent a great deal of time out there photographing and re-photographing the same locations. And I think that that is a huge lesson for us today, because we will pull out our phone, take a quick snap, put it back in our pocket, and then head off. We don't really think that A, it could have been better, or B, maybe we might need to come back at a different time to get a better image. It's very disposable. When you only have one chance to take a picture, you're gonna think a little bit more in depth about what you're gonna be coming away with. You think about that today. Forget your phone. You only have one exposure. What is it going to be? You're gonna make it count. You're not gonna waste it. So you're gonna say, well, wait a minute, I'm gonna wait a little while and see if the sun comes out, because we might get some sun rays. And this is very ordinary right now, and I can get this at any time because it always looks like this. But maybe I'm gonna be more patient, and I'm gonna sit here and we're gonna wait, and we're gonna see what happens. And that's how the really iconic images happen, because you're paying attention, you're observing the scene, taking it in. Maybe there's an eagle that might be swooping through the frame. There you go, that's something special. Now you have a chance to create an image that's going to last. The amount of thought that we put into it and the patience that we have is going to be equally related to how good the photo turns out. And one last point about the camera that he uses, not only does it use sheet film, but it's what's called a view camera. And if you notice that it has these bellows between the lens and the film back. And the reason for that is because that's how you focus the lens on a view camera. There's sometimes there's a wheel, or you manually push it in or out, and you'll turn that dial and the lens will get further and further away from the film back, and that's how you focus at a distance or closer together. So there's actually a lot of work that goes into it. What you would do is you would take the film back off, you would look through the ground glass by throwing the sheet over your head and create darkness, And now you're looking at an upside down image. And you would focus with that. Once you achieve your focus, you take off the hood, put the film on, and then you lock it in place and pull out the metal divider. So now the film is exposed to the lens. When you hit the shutter, that's your one chance to expose that negative. If you screw it up, you've ruined it. And there's only so many negatives that you can hike along with because each one of them requires their own wooden box carrier. And that stuff gets very heavy. So, you know, he would only travel around with maybe 8 or 10 exposures at most. And then when he's done with them, he has to guard them with his life to get them back to the darkroom. Otherwise, they can get ruined. So they're very, very, very valuable. There's only a few, and it takes days worth of hiking in order to get the images that you're trying to get. So put that into perspective. Let's look at some of the images that he's most known for. This one I really like because this is the Grand Tetons and this is the Snake River. And this is an iconic image, and it's special for more than one reason because it has been photographed by hundreds, if not thousands of photographers over the years by now. Everybody with their own unique take. Now, the reason why it's different for each person is because the weather was different for each person who was there. Some people have more patience and skill than others, and so their images come out better. Some people just don't put as much effort into it, and so the images are very ordinary. But the vantage point doesn't change. So it's not like you're gonna get a completely different photo. Over the years, the landscape may change slightly. The river can be higher or lower or wider or narrower. But it's a national park, so there's never going to be a gas station built right here. It's going to be preserved for a very, very long time, at least for the foreseeable future anyway. But something that is very present in Ansel Adams' images is the use of leading lines and composition pushing the eye to the distance. Okay, so in Snake River, we follow the river right to the Grand Teton Mountains. In this image over here, there's a road with a gate, and the eye follows through the rolling hills back and forth until it gets to the distance where it's dark and you have these low-hanging clouds. And stormy clouds in the distance really kind of inspires a sense of adventure. Some people aren't as adventurous as others, so I see that and I say, oh, that's cool, I want to go there. I want to get my rain gear and I want to hike out there and just like sit in the rain and listen and hear the squirrels running through the trees and stuff like that. That's how my mind works. Ansel Adams is also very famous for creating the zone system, which is sort of a simple way of assigning a value, a tonal value, to each part of the image. So in the zone system, you'll see the brightest points are a zone 10, which would be perfect white, and a zone 1 would be perfect black. So everything in between there, that 10 stops of gradient between 1 and 10 are going to be where all the detail of your image is. If something's perfect white, there's no detail. If it's perfect black, there's no detail there either. Now you definitely want to try to avoid including zone 1 and 10 in your image. You want to try to compress everything between 2 and 9, and more ideally between, say, 3 and 8 or 3 and 7. That would definitely compress that information into a more visible spectrum. Even in the image that we have here, the top of this snow-capped mountain is a zone 7, where in the shadow on the hillside is a zone 3. You could go, one notch darker than that one to a 2, but it would start to really, really get so dark that you're not going to see anything in there. And then if you can't see what's in it, it's just not quite as interesting because you're immediately subtracting that whole triangle from the analysis or the ability to analyze that image or look at it or inspect it. If you can't see anything in it, you don't have to look at it. It's no longer worthy of your time. So including detail is what makes the photo interesting. David Muench is another very famous photographer, and I included here the same perspective photographed by Ansel Adams years earlier. This one was photographed in 1967 as the Snake River overlook looking at the Grand Tetons again. And you can see there's a slightly different take on it, and he was able to get the sun rays coming out from behind the mountains as the sun is setting behind the peak. That's pretty cool, and it's a different look at that same perspective as photographed by Ansel Adams. I included this image from Death Valley National Park because it's sort of like an abstract landscape, which was sort of the beginning of that trend. It was sort of, nobody had considered thinking that landscape could be photographed abstractly before David Muench made it popular. And once it was put out there and said, you can do this, then people started to look at details everywhere in the landscape. As I mentioned, when film is so rare, when you're shooting sheet film and you only have, 8, 9, or 10 exposures, depending on how many you can carry with you, you really want to make them count. And so nobody is going to go out there just photographing shadows on the side of sand dunes because they feel like it's a waste of film. When you get really good at identifying the composition and just knowing that's a photograph, you can go ahead and take it, but it requires concentration and a commitment to the subject matter. You need to be focused on what makes that special and why those lines work for the composition. And abstract details in nature is now a huge genre of photography, especially when it's become so cheap with digital. The cost of making a mistake is nothing. So there isn't actually a dollar amount to taking a bad photograph, where it actually was the case 25, 30, and 60 years ago. Peter Leek is a more contemporary landscape photographer who's also still very, very famous. He actually holds the record for the most expensive photograph print ever sold. And that is this image called Phantom, which he sold for $6.5 million. Two other images here, Dreamcatcher and Blush, and the reason why I include Blush on here is because it kind of inspired and dawned a whole new genre of photography, which you would see on calendars or wall art at IKEA or a variety of different interior decorating stores, which is this sort of long landscape panoramic format with a centered object bisecting the frame. And that is something that if you are not familiar with Peter Leek and you saw this image, you'd say, most likely, I've seen many images like that before. Yes, because you've either seen Peter Leek's images or you've seen people who were inspired by Peter Leek. So the reason why I show it is because he's so inspirational to so many photographers and inspired a new genre of landscape photography and a new take on landscape photography. Leek was born in Australia and began working professionally in the 1980s. He now resides in the United States. So if you are even remotely interested in landscape photography, you will already know that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of landscape photos out there, many of them really, really good. And I actually encourage you to go to websites like Instagram or Flickr or 500px and look around for images that you like and find inspiring. There are so many out there that I would sometimes get a little bit down on myself saying, oh, mine aren't as good, because when you look at your own images for a long, long time when you're working on them, they don't look quite as amazing to you anymore as when you first took them. You need to spend time away from your images, come back and look at them with a fresh eye, and try not to get too obsessed with looking at other people's work, because that's going to jade your view and your eye will get attuned to color palettes. And one thing that's really dangerous about this, and this is a 500px curated gallery of landscapes, is that you get so used to seeing images small and in a grid that it's very overwhelming. And when you look at them all in a grid like this, each one of them is really, really good in their own, but you don't see flaws in any of the images because your eye's darting all over the place. We talk about composition, we talk about leading lines and layering and things like that, and that's what makes images work. But if you have contradicting leading lines all over the place, there's nothing for you to actually look at. And so when you are used to looking at images in a feed, or you're scrolling through, or you're looking at it in a grid on your laptop or your home computer, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by that. And so I encourage you not to spend too much time looking at it, especially if it's deterring you from creating your own work. If it is, forget it, don't look at it, because it's just going to distract you, and I want you to focus on your own artwork. Another thing that you definitely should not get distracted by is likes. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you at all. Your social media presence does not dictate how good of an artist you are, how good your photos are. If you have a huge social media following, you're just gonna get a lot of likes regardless. And that is easily proven by going on Instagram and looking at just some random celebrity who has, 10 million followers, and they post any horrible picture that really isn't even a good photograph and has no commentary beneath it or anything to actually appreciate, and they'll have tens of thousands of likes. What is actually being liked? I have no idea. There's no value there at all. So the amount of reception that you get on social media is not related at all, does not correlate to the value of the photograph. Sometimes it does, but it seems to me to be very rare. I'm someone who's never really worked on my social media presence. I focus on creating product and work, and social media has never been important to me. I now have to do it for PhotoIQ, but it's not something I enjoy, and I'm immune to putting out something that I think is good or I know is good and not getting much reception to it, because I've been more focused on the quality of those views rather than the quantity of the views. I want the right people, or the people who I respect, to appreciate what I'm doing. Not tens of thousands of random strangers who just automatically hit like robots. They don't actually contemplate what's being presented in the image. And then lastly, this may seem like a little bit of a contradiction of what I said before, but the value in studying great works of photography is that it will raise your own game. And it's much like if you're a painter or you draw with charcoal or pencil, you start out by copying other people's work. When you copy other people's work, and I say copy loosely, I don't mean like do it exactly the same, but try to accomplish the same kind of color quality or contrast, or sometimes with landscape, it's actually the effort put in to get up there pre-dawn and get a great photo. And that is what I mean by that. So copy the effort that goes into creating great images, not necessarily going to the exact same spot and taking the same photograph. So study photos that you think are really good and use them as ammunition and fuel to make yourself better. Okay, let's talk about altering your images. There is some ethics that I think personally goes into this, and you need to consider photography as a documentation, a representation of reality. It's your artwork, first of all. It's your creation, and you can do with it whatever you want that makes you happy. If you want to just get in there and retouch the heck out of it, then it's yours. You go do it. There's no limitation. There is no photography police. Although I think some people think that they are, but they're not. Sometimes I will remove small stuff. And this image, for example, this is a popular image of mine. And over here in this shadow, there was another small tree that is basically the same as this one. And I removed it. I retouched it out because it was distracting and it deterred. And so I removed it because it added nothing to the image. It was distracting, and it wasn't a big part of the image. It wasn't like there was a house over here, or something like that. It was something that was kind of unimportant. And to remove it didn't really, change the landscape in any way. It actually took me less than 2 minutes to remove. It was just a couple of clicks with a healing brush or clone stamp. But I will never add something to an image. So I don't do sky replacements. I don't add stars. I don't do that kind of stuff because I personally think that it's a bit unethical. When you present an image, people take it at face value and they say, wow, I can't believe that lines up so perfectly. And that's not the case because it didn't line up like that and it wasn't there. So I think that a lot of the images that people see out there, even in the fashion world, you can use this as an example. The Instagram model fad that's so popular, many images are altered with things that make the eyes bigger, the skin smoother, the mouth larger. These are the things that I think are dishonest and unethical because people believe what they see. They think that other people are honest and they take things at face value, so they will assume that these people are that gorgeous, or that they're that fit, or that they're that good of a landscape photographer that they seem to always get the perfect sky, or the stars perfectly exposed, or the Milky Way galaxy so saturated. You know, sometimes I have no idea how often it happens because I can't know this, but there are a lot of images that I've seen that are blatantly fake to me. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will retouch their images in order to get more prestige or get them out there to get higher acclaim. And there have been images that have won photography awards and competitions and had objects added to the image. And one famous example was one where a photographer had an upward angle of buildings, and there was a plane that was lined up just very perfectly right in the frame. And it turned out that airplane was added into the image, and it wasn't there. And that was one of the reasons why it won, because the timing was so perfect, the composition was so perfect, the planning was so perfect. But it wasn't, it was fake. And so for that reason, I don't add anything to the image, but I will remove very, very small things. However, it's your artwork, do what you will. I just ask that you be honest and upfront. If you add something crucial, like a perfectly lined up airplane, admit it. Admit it, because you know it will benefit you in the long run. To say, wow, you created a very realistic image, and you know, I applaud you for being honest and saying that you retouched it. And lastly, processing is not altering. This sky did not look this intense and this moody. It has a lot to do with the way I process the image, with the way that I drop the black tones, with the way that I process the black and white so that the blue tones become very, very dark. And it has a lot to do with the way I process the image, but that is the way that I saw it when I was there. When I photographed it, I said, oh, I can make that very intense, you know, with a little bit of film simulation, some grain, drop the blacks, drop the blues. This is gonna look really good. So I knew when I was hiking, when I saw this image and I shot it, I knew what it was gonna look like before I even brought it home. In another image of mine, it's called Salt Mine, I actually retouched out the Morton's salt logo. But that was because I was going to be selling it as fine art, and I just didn't want any corporate logos in the image. I felt like it actually distracted from the overall composition of the photo. And you know, that to me I think is perfectly acceptable. Here's a couple of tools that you can use to cheat, not really cheat, but sort of help you to plan and pre-plan your images. And two apps that I use a lot is Sun Surveyor and Sky Guide. And I also use the Weather Channel, which is indispensable to tell you when sundown and sunrise will be, and what the weather will be, and when it's gonna rain, or when it's gonna snow or stop snowing. So these are the things that'll really help you to plan your images. I used Sky Guide a couple of years ago to get a really cool image of the stars, because I was going to be going to Moab for a camping trip, and we had planned it several months in advance, and I wanted to know when the Milky Way galaxy was going to be visible. So I was able to go into Sky Guide and then tell the GPS location where I was going to be approximately, and then the time of day, and then cycle through, or rather the date, and then fast forward through the day into night and then into the next morning, and watch how the stars would spin around my location, so that I knew at what time of day I would have to get up and what location or direction I would have to be facing in order to get the best exposure of the sky. That is not something that anyone would have had 25 years ago, so this is a tool, a shortcut that we have now that's really invaluable. Certain times of the year, depending on the hemisphere, north or south, part of the globe that you're going to be in, the Milky Way might only be visible during the day, which means that you can't capture it. You want it to be visible during the night, and you also want it to be ideally a new moon, so that there's no full moon blinding you, because once you get a 25-second exposure, it's going to look like it's daytime. So you want no moon in the sky ideally, and you need clear sky. So a lot of things have to line up perfectly in order to get the image. Sun Surveyor is also really cool because it'll help you to plan when sunrise and sunset or where the sun will be. If you have a location in mind, you can go to that spot, open Sun Surveyor, and then you can hold your phone up to the sky and then watch the path of the sun live on your screen using your camera. So you can actually look at the trees or the mountainscape or the buildings that are in the scene and see where the sun is going to line up. And then you can imagine, oh, it's actually going to be behind this tree branch, so maybe I can get a really cool shot of the sun poking through these leaves at 4:45 in the afternoon. Okay, cool. Now you know when and where. That gives you a great advantage. Another thing you really want to know is the tide schedule, which is going to vary depending on your location and the time of year. So if you want to get a sunset shot at the beach, well, try to make sure that it's high tide or at least medium tide, because if it's low tide, it's not going to look quite as good. So these are the things that you can use to your advantage to plan out your shot. Okay, now it's time to get to your assignment. First, I want you to find 2 landscapes that speak to you. And so you're gonna go on social media or Google or whatever, Bing, the search engine of your choice. Try a variety of searches. Think of a topic that you really like. Maybe it's a location or a place in the world that you really enjoy. New Zealand, Australia, Japan, whatever it is. Find 2 landscapes that you really like. And then I want you to write 2 to 4 sentences on each landscape, explaining why those images are successful in your own words. It doesn't have to be long, it just has to explain what's working in that image. And lastly, I want you to start looking for a shoot location for next week's assignment. Okay, that's gonna do it for the introductory unit of landscapes. I hope to see you in the next unit. Until then, keep shooting.